We do these little talks because not only is it informative for people who are interested, it's considered part of an internal kind of structure within the way we do things here, because many years ago my dad pulled me aside during an opening of a young artist that he liked, and he said, what's happening here is something really good. I said, yeah, the show's sold out, Dad, it's going really well. He goes, no. What you don't realise is when I was a young artist, when I had all my young contemporaries, like, there was Boyd and, Nolan and what have you, we never had anyone record any of our conversations or any of our interviews. And so much has been lost in regard to an important part of Australian history. So what we're doing by having these talks is not only informing you people now, but as my father said, he said, we don't know, we might not realise it now, but we're creating a culture. And one of the reasons I showed Luke is because he is part of. The dog might disagree with but this is all part of the ongoing process of where art fits into itself ultimately in time. Luke I've known since he was a baby, and I thought, the poor bugger, being born into an artistic family.
We're at the wrong place.
No, you're not. But anyway, he's done something which I never had the courage to do, and that's become an artist. There was everything going my way in regard to a cultural upbringing, but the idea of being compared to my father all my life was something that was horrifying. And I'm really proud to see how Luke has not only had the courage to become an artist, but he's creating art that certainly is idiosyncratic to him. And he has his own vision. His dexterity, his capacity to do what he does is evident of great talent. And he's still very young, and I see him only getting better and better. But I can only say so much about the surface aspects of Luke and the internal mechanisms of perhaps the shenanigans of growing up in an artistic family. But I'll leave it to him and Kate to talk about exactly what the work is. So again, thanks Luke for a great show, and it's
thanks,
been a
Tim.
pleasure.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you for coming along, everyone. Today we're going to be in conversation with Luke Storrier.
Hello.
Lovely Luke Storrier. Luke, this is your second exhibition at OLSEN Gallery. I know you grew up in Sydney, but your mother tells me that you were always outdoors building things.
Yep.
What led you to sculpture?
Well, I was doing acting for many years, and that wasn't very physical, so I didn't get to connect with a lot of material. I was always finding moments on stage that weren't real things. But when you connect with material, it's a very different connection that you have. So I went back to sculpting after acting because I got sick of not touching anything. And I love the materiality of things. So I wanted to push things together that aren't supposed to be together, which is what this show is basically about.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. You graduated from the National Art School in 2013.
Yeah.
Where both your parents, Sharon, who is here today, and Tim are alumni. Can you tell us about that experience and what influence it had on you?
The National Art School?
Yeah, and being Tim's son there, and any anecdotes or stories you want to
I went as a mature age student, so I was sort of like a sponge. I soaked up all the information. I didn't do a lot of listening in school when I was in school, so this is my sort of school, so I did a lot of listening and I just hunkered down and got on with it, really. Yeah.
And any commentary on,
Well, it was lovely being there because Mum and Dad had been there. Obviously, I have a lot to thank the National Art School for, because if they hadn't have gone, I wouldn't be here. So
they met there.
That's where they met.
Kind of nice.
So, asked and he failed.
As in Tim failed. Yes.
Failed through lack of attendance mostly.
This exhibition came from a trip you took in November last year to Wilcannia.
Yeah.
And the countryside you've spoken about it being completely drought stricken, quite bleak. You know, there were animals dying.
It was horrible.
Can you tell us about that trip and how it became the inspiration for this show?
So I've always seen my dad go out into remote locations and spend a lot of time out there doing whatever he did. And I wanted to experience it for myself. So I'd been out with friends and with other people, but this time I wanted to go out on my own. And I took my dog Ace and I headed off to Wilcannia on my own with the ute full of equipment that I thought that I would use to make things out there. But it became quite evident that the landscape itself was dominating what I was doing every day. The harshness of the climate, the wind, the arid landscape itself becomes the thing that you're in. I took about 20 kilos of concrete because I wanted to make these totems in the ground, and I had all these plans. And then you get there and the shock of the actual landscape itself starts to tell you that all of your plans have now gone to shit, and you have to kind of lie down and be part of the landscape. You just have to be there. It's kind of bizarre. So
Sorry, how did it, though, you said that you needed to kind of turn that around and find something positive in this place where animals were kind of dying before your eyes, and it was...
Yeah, so because of the lack of water, there'd be mobs of kangaroos that would go through and decimate the local vegetation. So all of the local roos, once the big mobs have moved on, you're then left with all of the local roos that live there. They don't have anything to eat, so they're all hanging around where I was staying, and there was nothing for them to eat, so they're all malnutritioned. And I was just having a coffee on the front deck of this place that I was staying in. Every morning I'd come out and they'd sort of just very slowly go away from me because they thought I was a threat. And then they'd make their way back in, and then there was this one that kept coming back closer and closer. And then one morning I went out and it just died in front of me, just from malnutrition. But it's so weird because there's dead roos under the house. There's dead roos everywhere. I mean, it's just the landscape's dead. Yeah. There's no life out there, and then all that's on the horizon are these big willies which is that painting over there, the willies. These huge sort of, they look like tornadoes, but they're right out on the end of the landscape that are dancing along, and it just seems they become such a character in the landscape that you realise that when they're such a character that the landscape itself has no character. It's dead. It's void of. And then it becomes, you sort of start thinking, oh, fuck, what am I doing here? Why is this? What am I getting from this? So it was incredibly depressing to be in that drought-stricken area of Wilcannia. Yeah.
So how did you turn that? What did you do to turn that into this experience, which is quite hopeful? It has lots of symbols of, regrowth and rebirth.
Yeah. Well, I spent about 4 weeks trying to make a very depressing show. And it was a really depressing show. Like, I did some really, really depressing drawings. I couldn't find any hope in what I'd been through. So the time out there, I thought I'd come back into the city and machinate on it and there'd be something really dramatic about it. But really, I needed to actually do the opposite. I needed to inject my own enjoyment. I needed to kind of put colour in there, and I needed to put something in there that was hopeful. And that's where, for the first time, I put all the colour in. And there's a lot more colour in this show than any show I've done.
A lot more.
It's a reverse response to it. It was I kind of did the opposite to what I'd experienced to try and find some sort of hope. But it was also that shock of coming back into the city, which is sort of the concrete blocks that are in here. There's the city and this sort of desolate landscape. So it's sort of the two, which is the whole premise of the show, Fine Line, which is that fine line between city and country and life and death and happiness and sadness. And you always need both there to have one or the other, So.
Yeah. So it's almost like that that very sort of negative experience kind of reminded you that you want to see the world as with a cup half full?
I needed some happiness.
Yeah.
I needed some life in there because I had to inject the life into the ideas that I come up with.
Yeah.
So that's
been very successful. The art critic John MacDonald has recently described your thing as sculpture, painting and mixed media work hovering between abstraction and figuration. Do you agree? What is your thing?
My thing.
Your thing.
I think I'm still trying to find my thing. I think that's kind of evident in this work. I don't think many people know what their thing is in art. I mean,
maybe
you find,
that is the thing.
Or maybe that is the thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really into one thing, which is why I like experimenting and putting all of the different elements together. I mean, my first show, Remnants, was about literally smashing the different objects together to see if they'll stay together. Most of them still are together, I think. But this show is a lot more concise in that I was actively putting things together that I knew would stay together, but had an opposition and a juxtaposition. So I think that there seems to be a running theme of putting things that aren't meant to be together, or opposition of the yin and the yang. Dare I say the word? But that conflict of different materials and ideas. I mean, I'm still trying to find my thing. I mean, the show itself is about finding something. It's trying to find something in nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing out. Was nothing out there in Vulcania, so I had to sort of bring something back and find something. So I would agree with him. I don't think I have a thing, but I'll find a thing. I nearly called this thing "If I Knew I'd Tell You." So there you go.
So we've actually discussed what the exhibition title refers to.
Yeah.
It's about the kind of oppositions and the...
that fine line between, like what I said before,
in all sorts of relationships. Looking around the room, there's obviously many influences. You can see the influence of Brancusi, Christo, your father, maybe Brett Whiteley. Who and what influences you artistically?
I mean, I love Christo. I mean, I love all of those artists that you've mentioned, including my dad. I mean, with the Christo thing, I'm just addicted to that idea that you don't know what's underneath it. With the idea of wrapping something, it's not such a the Christo thing is really a question on what you can push, how far you can push an idea. There's a political statement in wrapping a building, how many years it takes to get approval to wrap that political building, or to do that massive artwork, to environmentally cover an entire landscape. When they did Sydney here, and I'm more into the idea of the initial idea of Christo was when you cover something completely by wrapping it becomes another object, but you're still intrigued by what the original object was. So you're sort of de-objectifying it. You're dematerializing it from what its original thing is, and giving a sort of a veiled version of it to an audience, which I really love. And then also you find different lines and different shadows, because when you wrap something, it flattens lines out, it covers things in very different ways. And the Brancusi thing, I mean, who doesn't? I mean, there's a lot of people that don't love Brancusi, but I didn't know that Brancusi had come out in this show. I just kind of, I didn't either, bud. Yeah.
Okay, well, are there any other influences that have fed you creatively?
I love Cy Twombly is a big one for me as well. I mean, I did a few works that were a bit Cy Twombly-esque, but I love Richard Serra's things.
Are there any other, creatives, filmmakers or musicians that influence you? A lot of artists refer to film and music influencing them. Is that an influence?
I listen to Classic FM probably too much in the studio. So as long as there's not someone telling me about the next top 40, 100 something, then I'm good.
You're good.
Yeah.
Okay. What does a day in the life of Luke Storrier look like?
Well, I wake up, I try not to cry, and then I... No, I honestly, I just can't wait to get into the studio, because it's only there that... I mean, my studio originally used to be full, it was just about sculpture, and I was trying to work with form in a really strict way. It was only when I got back from that expedition that I wanted to have more than that. I wanted colour, I wanted movement, so I made a acrylic area, an oil area, pastel area, and a sculpture area, and it was a massive freedom for me within the studio because I spent so long trying not to be a painter, because Dad was a painter and he is a painter and he's very good at that. But I sort of allowed myself to do something else and try it and mix them together. And so now it's sort of more like tasting something in a kitchen, like putting all the elements in there and then trying to see what that tastes like when you put that together, and dipping into the different versions of art that are in the studio. And that's what's exciting for me, is just getting in there and mashing them together and trying to see what happens and comes out of it.
Yeah.
But it's very much, they're very unplanned. I like to keep it very spontaneous, and I sort of squash things like the concrete cone, the one that's got the concrete in it. That was a wet piece of beautiful paper that I just scrunched up and then let set. And then it was only staring at it, a scrunched up piece of wet paper for 2 weeks, that then I went, I could pour concrete in that. But then it holds its form, and then there's a spontaneity that leads to that, and there's a freedom in that, opposed to just, it's literally finding something from nothing. You just kind of keep the ball rolling of what it is that you think you're doing. So that's why it's very exciting but incredibly scary, because when it's not there, it's not there.
And when it doesn't work.
When it doesn't work, it just really... But that's the bit... I mean, that's also the other fine line with a lot of these works, is that you push and push and push. And there are so many versions of these that got thrown out. That you just push and you go, wow, that looks like shit, let's start again. And you move on to the next one. But by pushing it to that edge or that fine line and pushing it, you find something and go, okay, maybe I should stop now,
Yeah.
Which is exciting. So the day in the life in Luke Storrier is trying to find something from nothing, really.
The fine line.
The fine line.
And before we open up to the floor for questions, what can we expect next, other than a baby?
Oh yeah. Well, that's actually, I should tell you that story. This piece here is called Golden Child, and it is literally a sculpture of my golden sperm. And I thought I did a pretty good job by making a baby, and I'm very proud of it. So it's actually an interesting story, because the wood that's actually under here is called King Billy pine, and it's an incredibly rare piece of pine that I came across from Tasmania. That they don't actually forest it; they don't cut them down anymore. It's illegal to cut them down. So it's an incredibly rare piece of wood, as I would, I think that my child would be incredibly. What's next? I'd like to keep pushing the fine line.
Good.
I would just like to keep doing more and more of this, and mashing the different mediums together, because I think there's something more there that I haven't quite found yet.
Excellent. We look forward to it.
I look forward to it too.